Okay, we're hearing quite a lot about increased odour control activity in the water sector. What are you seeing coming through the door at ERG?
The I think the primary thing, Phil, is that there's been a change in legislation. The Industrial Emissions Directive has led to an influx of inquiries directly related to the need for water companies in particular to adhere to these new standards that are required by that regulation. And so there's been a large influx of inquiries associated particularly with that side of things.
Okay, so demand being driven by regulation, the IED compliance, but is it just a case of aging assets reaching the end of their life? Are you seeing some of that as well?
The interesting thing is that we're aware of the Environment Agency having gone to inspect water companies' assets, odour control assets, to see what condition they're in and how they're working, and having visited a number of sites to find that actually none of them are in operational condition. So there's a combination of, I think what it's bringing to light is a combination of the fact that they have to now adhere to certain compliance levels, but also there is an aging asset situation out there also, and unfortunately sometimes odour control systems get neglected over a period of time and are sort of forgotten assets. And this is being demonstrated by the fact that it's not as straightforward as doing simple upgrades. We're finding that things have deteriorated to quite a poor condition and may need complete replacement. So there's a combination of the two.
Okay, and you mentioned obviously the Environment Agency's been visit sites and funds. I guess you spend a lot of time on operational sites yourself. So, without naming names, obviously, are you surprised at the condition of many existing odour control units in terms of perhaps not being in as good condition as they might be?
I'd like to say yes, extremely. Excuse me. I'd like to say yes, extremely surprised, but unfortunately, no, I'm not. I wouldn't want to tie everybody with the same brush, but unfortunately there is a bit of a legacy of odour control being an aspect of the operations on any wastewater treatment site that, because they're not a core part of the business, they're something that's at the end of periphery to just make sure that they're not causing problems with their local receptors and local neighbours, by creating odours and things like that. We tend to find, unfortunately, they can become neglected and can fall into quite poor condition. We do, as a company, have some frameworks where we service and maintain assets for different organisations. And we will report on as things decline, and the things that need to be done to keep them operational and keep them working well. And sometimes those recommendations can cost lots of money, and they can't always be reacted to immediately. So it's a mixed bag, but I think there are quite a lot of OCUs, that are odour control units, that are in poor condition, shall we say.
And maybe slightly related to that, I mean, how big a step change do you think there's been in terms of monitoring and performance expectations compared with when many of these assets were installed?
This is one of the aspects of the IED, the Industrial Emissions Directive, that is going to have an effect, because not only are they asking for an increased level of odour control and assurance that is going to be achieved, but they have requested also that there's an increased level of monitoring undertaken on every asset, to the extent now that each wastewater treatment site will receive a permit from the Environment Agency about the improvements they need to do in relation to the IED. These aren't just to do with odour control units, they're to do with all of their other assets as well. And within that, they'll have an emissions and monitoring section which will detail the monitoring that has to be done on these assets going forwards. And it includes lots of things that haven't been done previously, which have an additional implication with regard to cost and extra detail that they now are required to do, because there's monitoring that needs to be done continuously or daily that they didn't have to do previously. So the EA are guiding the clients, the water companies, to monitor their own assets a little bit more effectively going forward, which is good news for all of us, shall we say? So
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just wondering as well, are digestion-related odour control units presenting any particular challenges compared with maybe just other wastewater processes?
There is one aspect which is creating a little bit of confusion, and that is it's not exclusive to digestion related units, but the post digestion assets are what are generally covered by the Industrial Emissions Directive, and they can be quite rich in a particular compound, methane, which is non-odorous, so was never ever an issue previously for odour control systems, because it doesn't smell of anything, so why would we bother dealing with it? But it's also a very difficult compound to try and capture as well. I don't want to get overly technical, but because part of the Industrial Emissions Directive now states that the level of total volatile organic compounds that are being produced by these assets should not exceed 20 milligrams per meter cubed, one of the volatile organic compounds is methane. And methane can be found in fairly abundant levels, not ridiculously high, but exceeding the 20 milligrams per meter cubed in most post-digestion processes, and we see it coming out of the still coming out of the odour control units. Traditional odour control and odour abatement solutions, which ERG have, which would generally be biotrickling filters, carbon filtration, and chemical scrubbing when required, they barely touch methane, if at all. And we've seen that, and we've taken our own measurements to demonstrate that. So methane, there can be lots of upgrades to these odour control units to mean they meet many of the parameters that are in IED, but if you're using traditional methods, methane will remain untouched, and therefore, in theory, the total organic compound, the TVOC level, is still exceeded, which means that they wouldn't be compliant with the IED. So there is that complication, which we're working on, shall we say, in the background.
Yeah. I'm just wondering as well, when a site identifies a compliance gap, is it, I mean, if there's a typical case, is it usually a case of minor upgrades, or are full system replacements becoming more common? As I say, I'm sure there isn't a typical installation, but just give us some idea of whether it's minor upgrades or often a full replacement.
I think in every occasion it will depend on the age of the asset and how well it's been looked after. Because if it's relatively new, there's an opportunity to just provide some upgrades to it. Often you'll find that in the past, maybe in a site that hasn't been in too much of a I'm trying to think of the right word. Critical situation whereby its neighbours aren't complaining about odours, or it's not so much of an issue, that they might have just provided a solution that involves just a biotrickling filter to treat the odours. But a biotrickling filter won't necessarily allow them to meet the IED compliance levels, particularly for the odour unit concentration coming out. And so maybe just the addition of a carbon filter on the back end to polish that odour after the biotrickling filter will be sufficient for them to allow them to achieve that. Still, again, we're not meeting the methane scenario. But obviously, as I mentioned near the beginning, there's lots of assets which have which have been there for many years and have been neglected. So we're finding that they're not salvageable, and it's almost start again in order to try and achieve what you need to achieve. So